March 3, 1973. Cheswick, Delaware. The Cheswick Community Center sat on Maple Street in a converted colonial revival building that had once housed the town's first library. Vera Hutchins, the center's director, sat in her cramped second-floor office sorting through a stack of old newspapers donated by the Cheswick Historical Society. They were clearing out their storage room, and Vera had agreed to take whatever might be useful for the center's archives. She was about to toss aside a yellowed copy of the Philadelphia Inquirer from December 1945 when a photograph on page 3 caught her eye. The headline read, __quote _0 __. Below it, a formal group photo showed 5 men in dark suits standing before an American flag. The caption identified them as recipients of the Presidential Medal for Merit for their work on classified chemical defense projects. The third man from the left was identified as Dr. Clyde L. Merriweather, age 38, of the Army Chemical Warfare Service, recognized for developing strategic compounds for battlefield applications. Vera studied the face. Strong jaw, prominent nose, piercing eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Confident posture, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. A man who carried himself with authority. She read the brief biography beneath. Dr. Merriweather, a native of Baltimore, earned his doctorate from Johns Hopkins University in 1932. His wartime research remained classified, but military officials described his contributions as __quote _1 __. Vera set down the newspaper and looked out her window at the community center's main hall, where the senior citizens choir was gathering for their Tuesday evening rehearsal. Among them, she spotted a stooped figure in a threadbare cardigan shuffling toward his usual seat in the back row. Clyde Merriweather. Or at least, that's what his membership card said. He'd joined the choir 6 months ago, in September 1972. But the man downstairs bore no resemblance to the confident scientist in the photograph. None whatsoever. Different bone structure, different build, different everything. The face in the newspaper belonged to an eagle. The man in her choir looked like a sparrow. Vera picked up the paper again, then glanced out the window, then back at the paper. One of them was real. But which one? And what had happened to the man in the photograph? September 1972, 6 months earlier. Indian summer had settled over Cheswick with oppressive humidity that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. The town, population 8,000, sat 30 miles south of Wilmington, close enough to smell industry on northerly winds, but far enough to maintain its small-town character. Main Street still had a hardware store, a diner with a soda fountain, and the First Methodist Church where Vera's grandfather had been married in 1898. Vera Hutchins was 43 years old. 15 of those years spent running the Cheswick Community Center. Her husband Frank had left her 8 years ago for a secretary at the DuPont plant in Wilmington. Their 2 children were away at college, Tommy at Penn State, Linda at the University of Maryland. The center had become Vera's entire life, her purpose, the place where she felt most needed. It offered everything from youth programs to senior activities, art classes to community theater. The building itself needed constant maintenance. The furnace was temperamental, the roof leaked in heavy rain, and the wooden floors creaked with every footstep. But it was hers to manage, hers to love. That September afternoon, Vera was reviewing budget spreadsheets when someone knocked on her door. __quote _2 __, she called, not looking up. The door opened slowly. A thin, elderly man stood in the doorway, holding a worn fedora in his hands. He was perhaps 5'7", with thinning gray hair and a face that seemed to have been eroded by time, all sharp features smoothed away. He wore a brown suit that had seen better days, a white shirt with a yellowed collar, and a narrow tie pulled uncomfortably tight. His voice was soft, hesitant. He stepped inside tentatively, as if unsure whether he was allowed. Vera smiled and pulled out her registration book. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. The man perched on its edge, still clutching his hat. Quote 7. Quote 8. He cleared his throat. Quote 9. Vera wrote it down. Quote 10. Quote 11. Quote 12. Quote 13. Quote 14. He hesitated. Vera paused, sensing something in his reluctance. The man looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. Vera nodded. She'd heard this story many times. Lonely, elderly people, their spouses gone, their families scattered, clinging to any opportunity to feel connected. The choir meets Tuesday and Friday evenings at 6 o'clock. You're welcome to start this week. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. He stood, placed his hat carefully on his head, and gave a small, old-fashioned bow before leaving. Vera watched him go, then returned to her spreadsheets. Just another retiree. Nothing remarkable. Clyde Merriweather became a model choir member. He arrived 15 minutes early for every rehearsal, sat in the back corner, never missed a session. He sang quietly but accurately, a clear tenor voice. Eleanor Finch, the choir director, praised him to Vera. If only everyone were as reliable as Mr. Merriweather. Always on time, always prepared. But he kept to himself. He responded politely when spoken to, but never initiated conversation. After rehearsals, he was always the first to leave, quickly gathering his coat and disappearing into the evening. Vera noticed him sometimes as she made her rounds through the building, checking that everything was in order. Mr. Merriweather seemed determined to remain invisible, to blend into the background, to attract no attention. This struck her as odd. Most lonely elderly people craved interaction, seized every opportunity for conversation. But this man seemed to be hiding. One November evening, Vera stayed late to finish a grant application for the State Arts Council. The paperwork was due the next morning, and she'd put it off too long. She was deep in budget calculations when she heard music drifting up from the first floor. Piano music. Someone was playing in the small auditorium, playing beautifully, professionally. Chopin, she thought. One of the nocturnes. She'd heard it once at a concert in Philadelphia years ago. The melody flowed through the empty building, melancholy and yearning, filled with a kind of resigned sadness. Vera stood and walked quietly down the stairs. The auditorium door was slightly ajar. She looked inside. Clyde Merriweather sat at the upright piano, completely absorbed. His hands, gnarled and age-spotted, moved across the keys with remarkable grace and precision. His face was different, not the timid, apologetic expression he usually wore, but focused, almost severe. This was not the face of an amateur. This was someone who had trained for years, who knew exactly what he was doing. The music ended. He sat motionless for a moment, hands hovering above the keys. Then he lowered them slowly to his lap. Vera must have made a sound, because he turned sharply, his eyes wide. For just a second, she saw something like fear cross his face. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't know anyone was here. The door was open and I wanted to remember what it felt like." He stood and closed the piano lid. "I haven't played in years." "You play beautifully," Vera said. "Where did you study?" "Nowhere. Self-taught." He was already putting on his coat. "I used to pick things up by ear. Play at parties, weddings, small jobs. But that was a long time ago. A different life." He nodded goodbye and hurried out. Vera stood alone in the auditorium. Self-taught people didn't play like that. That was conservatory-level technique. That was the kind of skill that took years of formal training. Why was he lying? And what did he mean by __quote_29__? Winter came early that year. By December, Cheswick was buried under snow, and the community center's ancient furnace struggled to keep up. Vera wore sweaters under her blazer and kept a space heater under her desk. Clyde Merriweather continued his faithful attendance at choir rehearsals. Vera found herself watching him more carefully now, seeing things she hadn't noticed before. His hands, for instance. Long, delicate fingers, not the hands of a laborer, the hands of a musician, a surgeon, a scientist. and his posture, despite his habitual stoop, suggested someone who'd once carried himself very differently. As if he were deliberately hunching, trying to appear smaller, less significant. One afternoon in late January, Eleanor Finch knocked on Vera's office door. Eleanor Finch was 52, a music teacher who'd retired from the public schools but couldn't quite leave teaching behind. She had sharp eyes and an even sharper ear for music. Eleanor said, settling into a chair. Eleanor leaned forward. Vera said quietly. Eleanor stood. Vera was curious too. She decided to try talking to Clyde directly, but he seemed to sense her interest and became even more elusive. He arrived just as rehearsal started and left the moment it ended. He avoided eye contact in the hallways. In February, the community center hosted its annual talent showcase. The senior choir was scheduled to perform 2 numbers. Eleanor wanted to accompany one piece on piano, but the center's regular pianist, Mrs. Doris Pemberton, wasn't skilled enough for the arrangement Eleanor had chosen. Vera suggested. Eleanor's eyes lit up. That's a wonderful idea. Would you call him? Vera looked up his boarding house number. A woman answered, the landlady, Mrs. Kowalski, and called him to the phone. Hello? His voice sounded wary. Mr. Merriweather, this is Vera Hutchins from the community center. I have a favor to ask. Would you be willing to play piano for the choir at the showcase? Mrs. Finch says you'd be perfect for the piece she's chosen. A long silence. Then, I'd really prefer not to perform in public. It's for the choir, for everyone's benefit. Please? Another pause. Heavy breathing on the line. Finally, all right, but just this once. And please, no photographs. Is that understood? Strange request, Vera thought, but she agreed. The showcase was held on a Saturday evening in late February. The community center's main hall was packed with families and friends. The senior choir performed their first number, a simple folk song arrangement, to warm applause. Then, Eleanor Finch announced the second piece, __quote_50___, arranged for 4-part harmony with piano. Clyde Merriweather walked to the piano. He moved stiffly, like a man heading to an execution. When he sat down and placed his fingers on the keys, Vera saw his hands trembling. Eleanor raised her baton. The choir began to sing. And Clyde played. It was magnificent. His playing transformed the familiar hymn into something powerful and moving. The piano part was complex, rolling bass lines, intricate arpeggios in the treble, dramatic crescendos, and he navigated it flawlessly. His hands no longer trembled. They danced across the keys with absolute confidence. The audience rose to their feet when the piece ended. The applause was thunderous. People were wiping their eyes. Clyde stood quickly, bowed once, and retreated to the back of the stage, his face pale. After the show, several people approached him, congratulating him, asking where he'd studied. He mumbled vague responses and excused himself as soon as possible. Vera watched him slip out the side door into the cold February night. The next day, Sunday, Vera was at home when her phone rang. Mrs. Hutchins? This is Morton Fielding. I don't think we've met. I'm sorry, Mr. Fielding. Should I know you? I'm a music professor at the University of Delaware. I was at your showcase last night. I came to see my niece perform with the children's dance group, but I stayed for the choir, and I have to tell you, the pianist was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. I'd like to invite him to give a faculty recital. Would you give me his contact information? Vera felt uneasy. I'm not sure he'd be interested, Mr. Fielding. He's very private. Please, just ask him. A talent like that shouldn't be hidden. The man could have played professionally. Maybe he did once. Here's my number. Vera took down the information and promised to pass it along. But when she called the boarding house that evening, Mrs. Kowalski said Mr. Merriweather wasn't home. Mrs. Kowalski said, 3 weeks passed. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The choir rehearsals continued without Clyde Merriweather. Eleanor was disappointed but not surprised. Quote, 58, quote, she said to Vera. Quote, 59, quote. Vera couldn't stop thinking about him. She kept returning to that newspaper photograph from 1945. Dr. Clyde L. Merriweather, awarded the Presidential Medal for Merit. Could they be the same person? The ages didn't quite match. The scientist in the photo would be 73 now, while the man in her choir claimed to be 65. And the faces were completely different. But what if the choir member had stolen the name? What if the real Clyde Merriweather was someone else entirely? On impulse, Vera went to the Cheswick Public Library. She asked the reference librarian, Mrs. Adelaide Crawford, for help. Vera explained. Mrs. Crawford, a formidable woman in her 60s who knew the library's resources intimately, nodded. We have microfiche of major newspapers from the war years. What name are you looking for? Clyde Livingston Merriweather. He was a chemical warfare scientist. They spent 2 hours searching. They found several mentions of Dr. Merriweather, a 1943 article about chemical defense research at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, a 1944 piece about scientists working on classified projects, and finally, a small obituary from the Baltimore Sun, dated August 12, 1952. Dr. Clyde Livingston Merriweather, 45, prominent chemical warfare researcher, died August 7th at the Federal Correctional Institution in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where he was serving a sentence for espionage. Dr. Merriweather was convicted in 1948 of passing classified information to Soviet agents. He maintained his innocence throughout his trial and imprisonment. He is survived by a sister, Mrs. Dorothy Merriweather Keene of Baltimore, and his research partner, Dr. Wallace Fenwick of Bethesda, Maryland. Vera read the obituary 3 times. The real Clyde Merriweather had died in prison 20 years ago, which meant the man in her choir was an imposter. Vera spent the next week in turmoil. She had discovered a crime, identity theft at minimum, possibly more, but she didn't know what to do with the information. Should she go to the police? But what if there were extenuating circumstances? What if the man had good reasons for assuming another person's identity? She decided to find out more before making any decisions. She called Dr. Wallace Fenwick's office at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. His secretary said Dr. Fenwick was retired but still maintained an office as an emeritus researcher. She took Vera's number and promised to have him call back. 2 days later, he did. Mrs. Hutchins, I understand you're inquiring about Clyde Merriweather. May I ask why? Vera explained about the choir member, the performance, and her discovery of the obituary. Dr. Fenwick was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Could you describe this man's physical appearance? Vera did. Approximately 5'7", thin build, gray hair, soft features, appearing to be in his mid-60s. That's not Clyde, Doctor, Fenwick said immediately. Clyde was 6'2", athletic build, sharp features, and he'd be 73 now if he'd lived, not 65. What you found is someone using his identity. Dr. Fenwick, can I ask you something? Do you believe Dr. Merriweather was guilty? Another long silence. No, I never believed it. Clyde was many things, brilliant, driven, sometimes difficult, but he wasn't a traitor. He loved this country. He dedicated his career to defending it. His voice grew bitter. But it was 1948, Mrs. Hutchins. McCarthy's investigations were just beginning. There was hysteria about communists everywhere. Clyde had attended some Progressive Party meetings before the war, back when it was just about labor rights and economic policy. Someone decided that made him a security risk. They manufactured evidence, found a desperate ex-convict willing to testify that Clyde had approached him about selling secrets. It was all fabricated, but the jury believed it. 10 years they gave him. He died 4 years in. Heart attack. He was 45 years old. That's terrible, Vera said quietly. It was worse than terrible. It was an injustice, and it broke more than just Clyde. There was another man, his closest friend, who tried to defend him, gave testimony at the trial. That man paid a price too. What do you mean? His name was Duncan Whitmore. He and Clyde had known each other since childhood, grew up in the same Baltimore neighborhood. Duncan was a talented musician, studied at the Peabody Conservatory, dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. But he had to drop out when his father died. Took a job at Edgewood Arsenal as a laboratory technician to support his mother and sisters. That's where he met Clyde again. They became close friends. When Clyde was arrested, Duncan testified as a character witness. He was eloquent, passionate. But the prosecutor twisted everything, made it sound like Duncan was part of some conspiracy. Duncan wasn't charged with anything, but his reputation was destroyed. He lost his job, couldn't find work anywhere. And he had a record himself. Some minor trouble as a young man, I think. Nothing serious, but enough to make him vulnerable. What happened to him? I don't know. I heard he left Baltimore in late 1952, right after Clyde died. Just disappeared. I always wondered what became of him. Mr. Merriweather? Nice enough man, quiet, paid his rent on time. Left 3 weeks ago. Said something about visiting family. Did he leave a forwarding address? Nope, but he left some things in his room. Said he'd be back for them eventually. Could I see the room? Mrs. Kowalski looked suspicious. Why? I'm from the community center where he sang. We have a check for him, his share of the showcase ticket sales. I'd like to make sure he gets it. This was partly true. There was a small performer's fee. Well, I suppose that's all right. Come on. He left those books in the closet. May I borrow this? I suppose. If you're going to find him, you can give it back. Vera took the journal home and spent the evening reading it. The entries were sparse, written in small, precise handwriting. The first entry was dated September 3rd, 1952. C died today. Heart gave out. They said it was quick, but I know better. It was this place, this injustice that killed him. He was stronger than any man I knew, but even he couldn't survive being caged for something he didn't do. I testified for him. I told them the truth. It didn't matter. Now he's gone, and I'm marked. Lost my job last week. Nobody will hire me. They all know I was C's friend, and that's enough to make me suspect. I'm leaving Baltimore, starting over somewhere. But where? Who will I be? I can't be Duncan Whitmore anymore. That name is poison now. __quote _89 __. In New York. Living in a flop house. Money running out. Saw a notice in the newspaper today. The draft board is looking for men who never registered. They're tracking down evaders from the war years. I realized something. C's selective service registration shows he was 4F, medically deferred because of his flat feet and poor vision. I look nothing like him. But who checks? I could be him. He's dead. He won't need his name anymore. And nobody knows what happened to his body. They buried him in the prison cemetery. No family came to claim him, just his sister, and I heard she moved to California years ago. I'm thinking about it. Is it wrong to steal a dead man's identity? Especially when that man was my closest friend? Would he forgive me? I think he would. C always said the system was corrupt, that it ate good men alive. He'd understand why I need to disappear. The entries continued sporadically over the years. Duncan, or the man who'd been Duncan, described his new life. He got a job as a night watchman at a factory in Newark. Then he moved to Philadelphia, worked as a janitor. He never stayed anywhere long, always worried someone would recognize him or ask too many questions. He taught himself to play down his education, to speak less precisely, to hunch his shoulders and make himself forgettable. By 1965, he'd settled in Trenton. I'm getting old, quote, 91 tired of running. Maybe it's time to stop. Maybe it's time to just be an ordinary person. Small town, quiet. Nobody knows me here. Maybe I can finally rest. I'm so lonely. E died 10 years ago. Never had children. Nobody left who knows my real name. Sometimes I wake up and can't remember who I am. Duncan or Clyde. The man I was or the man I'm pretending to be. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But I miss music. Miss playing. I've been too afraid all these years. Afraid someone would hear me play and wonder how an uneducated man learned to play like that. But I'm old now. What does it matter? Let me have this one thing. Let me sing again, even if it's in a small-town choir nobody cares about. Vera closed the journal. Her hands were shaking. This man hadn't committed any serious crime. He'd simply tried to survive in a country that had turned against him for being loyal to a friend. He'd taken the identity of someone who was already gone, someone who'd been destroyed by the same injustice. Was that really so terrible? 3 days later, Clyde Merriweather, or Duncan Whitmore, returned to Cheswick. Vera saw him walking down Main Street on a Saturday afternoon. He looked thinner, more worn. She followed him at a distance as he made his way back to the boarding house. She waited an hour, then knocked on his door. He opened it, saw her, and his face went pale. "Mrs. Hutchins." "Mr. Whitmore," she said gently. "May I come in?" He stood frozen for a moment, then stepped aside. They sat across from each other in the small room. Vera placed the journal on the table between them. "Mrs. Kowalski let me look through your things. I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, but I needed to understand. So you know. I know that you're Duncan Whitmore. I know that Clyde Merriweather died in 1952, and I know why you took his name." He closed his eyes. "Are you going to the police?" "I don't know yet. I want to hear your side first. All of it. Clyde was like a brother to me. We grew up 3 houses apart on Lafayette Street in Baltimore. We were both poor, both smart, both determined to make something of ourselves. He went to Hopkins on a scholarship. I went to Peabody on a scholarship. We were going to change the world, him with his science, me with my music. __quote _103 __. We stayed close through the war. Clyde's work was classified, but I knew it was important. He was developing chemical countermeasures, ways to protect soldiers from gas attacks. He was brilliant. When the war ended, they gave him a medal. He deserved it. Then the nightmare began. 1947. Someone accused him of being a communist. Said he'd attended meetings, talked about socialist ideas. It was true, in a way. We'd both gone to some meetings before the war, when it was still legal, when it was just about workers' rights. But by 47, that made you a traitor. They arrested him in February 1948. The trial was a farce. They had a witness, some ex-convict who claimed Clyde had tried to sell him secrets. It was obvious the man was lying, but the jury believed him. Clyde got 10 years. I testified for him, told them he was the most patriotic man I knew. They didn't care. And after the trial, I became a target too. Lost my job. Couldn't find another one. Every door closed in my face. Clyde died in prison in August 1952. Heart attack. He was 45 years old. I went to the funeral, just me and his sister Dorothy. We were the only ones who came. They buried him in the prison cemetery, a numbered grave. After that, I had nothing. No job, no prospects. I was 45 years old with no future. And then I thought, Clyde's gone. His name is gone. Nobody's using it. What if I took it? What if I became him? I knew it was wrong, but I was desperate. I got Clyde's death certificate from the prison. They just sent it when I requested it, thought I was a relative. I found his old draft registration. With those documents, I could get a Social Security card in his name. Nobody checked faces back then. Nobody compared. And now you know. So what happens now? What you did was illegal. Identity theft is a serious crime. But the man whose identity you took was already dead. And you didn't hurt anyone. You just tried to survive. The law doesn't care about my reasons. Maybe not. But I do. I'm not going to report you. Not yet. I need time to think about this. But I want you to promise me something. What? Stop hiding. Come back to the choir. Play the piano. Use the gifts you have. Whatever time you have left, don't waste it being invisible. __quote _114 __. I'm afraid. I know, but you've been afraid for 20 years. Isn't that long enough? Duncan Whitmore. She couldn't think of him as Clyde anymore. Returned to the choir the following Tuesday. Eleanor Finch welcomed him back with a hug, and the other members were genuinely glad to see him. He still sat in the back row, still left quickly after rehearsals, but Vera noticed a small change. He held himself a little straighter. His voice was a little stronger. In April, Eleanor asked him to accompany the choir for their spring concert. He agreed. This time, when people approached him afterward to offer compliments, he smiled and thanked them instead of fleeing. In May, Vera invited him to teach a piano class for beginners. He hesitated, then accepted. Every Saturday morning, he sat at the upright piano in the small auditorium, guiding 8 children through scales and simple pieces. Vera watched through the door sometimes. He was a patient, gentle teacher. She also noticed that he looked healthier. The hunched shoulders had straightened. The fearful expression had softened. It was as if he were slowly returning to himself, becoming the person he'd been before fear had bent him into hiding. But Vera couldn't forget what she knew. The legal reality remained. Duncan Whitmore was living under a stolen identity, and now she was complicit in hiding that fact. She struggled with the moral weight of it. Should she go to the police? Should she let him continue living his quiet, harmless life? In June, the decision was taken out of her hands. A man walked into the community center on a humid Thursday afternoon. Vera was at the front desk when he approached. He was in his mid-50s, well-dressed in a gray suit, with thinning hair and a polite but authoritative manner. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for information about one of your members, a man named Clyde Merriweather. May I ask why?" "I'm Special Agent Richard Halloran, FBI. We're conducting a routine background check. Mr. Merriweather recently applied for a part-time position at a VA hospital, and all applicants are required to undergo security clearance." "I see. Is Mr. Merriweather here now?" "No, not at the moment. He teaches on Saturday mornings. May I ask what kind of information you need?" __quote _122 __. Just routine questions. How long has he been a member here? Has he exhibited any unusual behavior? Does he have any known associates? __quote _123 __. He's been with us since September of last year. He's a model member, reliable, helpful, well-liked. No problems whatsoever. And before he came to Cheswick, do you know anything about his background? __quote _125 __. Only what he told me. He said he worked various jobs over the years. His wife died some years ago. He's retired now, living on his pension. Which pension would that be? Vera realized her mistake. Duncan would have had to claim some kind of income to survive. If he'd been receiving Social Security under Clyde Merriweather's name, that was fraud. "I'm not sure, __quote _128 __. You'd have to ask him." Agent Halloran looked at her thoughtfully. "Mrs. Hutchins, has Mr. Merriweather ever mentioned his time at Edgewood Arsenal? His work as a chemical warfare scientist during World War II?" "No, he's never mentioned anything like that." "Interesting, because according to our records, Dr. Clyde Merriweather died in federal prison in 1952, which makes me very curious about who the man using his name actually is." "I see. We'd like to speak with him. Could you ask him to contact me?" He handed her a card. "And Mrs. Hutchins, if you know anything you're not telling me, Now would be the time. Obstruction of a federal investigation is a serious matter. Quote 136 I should have known. The hospital application asked for my social security number. They would have run it through their system. Of course it would trigger an alert. What are you going to do? I don't know. I could run again, leave tonight, disappear. For how long? Another 20 years? Until you're 90? I'm 73 now.
I don't have another 20 years.
Then maybe it's time to stop running. You mean turn myself in? He shook his head. Vera, I've committed crimes. Identity theft, fraud, probably a dozen other things. They'll send me to prison. At my age, that's a death sentence. Maybe. Or maybe they'll show mercy. You're an old man who made a desperate choice 20 years ago. You haven't hurt anyone. You've lived quietly, stayed out of trouble. That has to count for something. I'm tired, Vera. So tired of lying, of hiding, of being afraid someone will discover who I really am. Or who I was. I don't even know anymore. Then end it. Tell the truth. Whatever happens, at least you'll be yourself again. He turned to face her. Will you come with me? When I go to them? Yes,
If you want me to.
The next morning, they went to the FBI field office in Wilmington. Agent Halloran was surprised to see them, but invited them into an interview room. My name is Duncan Whitmore, the old man said. I've been using the identity of Clyde Merriweather for 20 years. I'm here to confess. What followed was a lengthy interview. Duncan told his story, his friendship with Clyde, the unjust espionage conviction, Clyde's death, his own desperate decision to assume Clyde's identity. Halloran listened, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. You understand that what you've done is illegal? Yes. You've been receiving Social Security benefits under a false identity. That's fraud. Yes. And you've been living under false pretenses for 2 decades. That's identity theft. Yes. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of the strangest cases I've ever handled. On one hand, you've clearly broken the law. On the other hand, the man whose identity you took was already dead, and your crimes have been entirely nonviolent. You've harmed no one. So what happens now? I'll have to file charges. The U.S. Attorney will decide how to proceed. But given your age, your clean record aside from this, and the unusual circumstances, I doubt they'll seek a harsh sentence. You'll probably face probation, fines, maybe some community service. Prison is unlikely. Duncan looked stunned. Really? This isn't 1952 anymore, Mr. Whitmore. We've learned some things since then, including the fact that the case against your friend Clyde was likely fabricated. I pulled the old files. That witness who testified against him? He recanted in 1965, said the FBI pressured him to lie. It was buried at the time, but it's in the record now. Your friend was innocent. I always knew that. I believe you. You'll need to appear before a magistrate. Mrs. Hutchins, thank you for bringing him in. That will work in his favor. The legal process took months. Duncan was formally charged with identity theft and fraud. His attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Brennan, argued for leniency based on his age, his lack of any other criminal history, and the extraordinary circumstances of his case. The prosecution, perhaps recognizing that the optics of imprisoning a 73-year-old man for a nonviolent crime wouldn't play well, agreed to a plea deal. In November 1973, Duncan Whitmore appeared before a federal judge. He pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced him to 3 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution of the Social Security benefits he'd received under Clyde Merriweather's name, approximately $18,000. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, what you did was wrong. The law exists for a reason, and you violated it. However, I recognize that you acted out of desperation, not malice. Your crimes were victimless, and you've shown genuine remorse by turning yourself in. I hope you'll use this second chance to live the rest of your life honestly. Duncan stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I will. The community center counted his piano teaching as part of his community service hours. He expanded the program, teaching not just children but anyone who wanted to learn. He also began playing occasional recitals on Sunday afternoons, classical music, jazz standards, show tunes. Word spread, and people started coming from neighboring towns. Vera watched him transform. The frightened, hunched man who'd first walked into her office was gone. In his place was someone confident, engaged, alive. He'd reclaimed himself. In the spring of 1974, a reporter from the Wilmington News Journal did a story on Duncan's case. The headline read, "Identity Thief or Victim of History? Elderly Man's Strange Tale of Friendship and Survival." I always wondered what happened to you. After the trial, you just vanished. I had to. They destroyed Clyde. I wasn't going to let them destroy me too. I understand, and I'm sorry I didn't do more to help. You couldn't have done anything. Nobody could. I've been working on something. A paper about Clyde's work, about what really happened to him. I want to clear his name, get his conviction overturned posthumously. Would you help me? You knew him better than anyone. Yes. Yes, I'll help. The exoneration campaign took 3 years. Dr. Fenwick and Duncan compiled evidence, tracked down witnesses, filed petitions. In 1977, a federal court vacated Clyde Merriweather's espionage conviction, ruling that it had been based on fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. The court issued a formal apology to Clyde's family and declared him innocent of all charges. Clyde's sister Dorothy, now elderly and living in San Diego, flew to Washington for the ceremony. She met Duncan there. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for never forgetting him." I couldn't forget, quote, 179, quote, "He was the best friend I ever had," quote, 180, quote, "I'm 78 years old," he told Vera. "I've had more time than I deserved, and I got to be myself again. That's enough." He died on November 12, 1985 at Cheswick Memorial Hospital, with Vera holding his hand. At his funeral, held at the community center, more than 200 people attended. The senior choir sang Amazing Grace. A string quartet played one of the Chopin nocturnes he'd loved. Dr. Wallace Fenwick gave the eulogy, talking about Duncan's loyalty, his courage, and his music. Duncan Whitmore was a man who lost himself and then found himself again, Fenwick said. He made mistakes, yes, but he also showed us what it means to be truly brave. Not by never being afraid, but by finally choosing truth over fear. Vera stood at the service, tears streaming down her face, thinking about the frightened man who'd walked into her office 13 years earlier, asking if there was room in the choir for one more. Thinking about how she'd almost turned him in, almost destroyed the fragile peace he'd found. She'd made the right choice, she thought. Sometimes mercy matters more than law. Sometimes the greatest justice is simply allowing someone to be human again. After Duncan's death, Vera wrote a long article about his story for American Heritage magazine. It was published in 1986 under the title, "The Man Who Stole His Friend's Name, A Story of the McCarthy Era." In memory of Duncan Whitmore, 1907 to 1985, who taught us that it's never too late to reclaim your true self. She spent her retirement writing a book about the case, Stolen Identity, Reclaimed Life, The True Story of Duncan Whitmore and Clyde Merriweather. It was published in 1995 by a small university press and became required reading in several criminal justice and ethics courses. Vera died in 2007 at age 78. At her funeral, the senior choir, which still met twice a week, still sang the same old songs, performed the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The same arrangement Duncan had played so magnificently 35 years earlier. In 2012, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, studying Cold War-era scientific persecution, came across Clyde Merriweather's files. She was shocked to discover that much of his classified research had been based on theoretical work that anticipated modern chemical defense systems. His contributions, lost for decades because of his wrongful conviction, were finally being recognized by a new generation of scientists. A symposium was held in his honor. Duncan's story was retold there, not as a crime story, but as a testament to loyalty and friendship in impossible times. One of Duncan's former piano students, now a middle-aged concert pianist himself, performed at the symposium. He played the Chopin nocturne Duncan had been playing the night Vera first heard him. The same piece that had given him away, that had shown he was more than he pretended to be. The music echoed through the hall, beautiful and melancholy, a reminder that some things, talent, love, loyalty, truth, cannot be hidden forever. They persist, waiting for the moment when they can finally be acknowledged. And in that moment, both men, Clyde Merriweather and Duncan Whitmore, lived again in the notes, together as they had been in life. Friends, brothers, two souls linked across death and time by a bond stronger than any injustice could break. Epilogue. In 2018, the city of Baltimore erected a dual memorial in Patterson Park, near the neighborhood where both men had grown up. Two bronze statues stood side by side, one of a man in a laboratory coat holding a beaker, the other of a man seated at a piano. A plaque between them read, Dr. Clyde Livingston Merriweather, 1907 to 1952. Brilliant scientist, victim of injustice, exonerated 1977. Duncan Andrew Whitmore, 1899 to 1985. Loyal friend, gifted musician, survivor. They met as boys, remained brothers, and showed us that friendship endures beyond death, beyond injustice, beyond fear. In honoring them, we honor all who suffered in the shadow of false accusations, and all who chose loyalty over safety. Every year on November 12th, the anniversary of Duncan's death, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra holds a free concert in the park. They always include at least one Chopin nocturne. And every year people come, descendants of both men's families, former students of Duncan's, scientists who build on Clyde's work, and ordinary citizens who've heard the story and been moved by it. They come to remember that history is made not just by the powerful, but by ordinary people who refuse to let injustice have the final word. By people who risk everything for friendship. By people who live under false names but never lose their true selves. They come to remember Duncan Whitmore and Clyde Merriweather, two men who should have lived ordinary lives, whose friendship should have been ordinary, but who instead became symbols of something larger, the resilience of human dignity in the face of persecution, and the power of truth to survive even when buried for decades. The music plays, the wind rustles through the trees, and somewhere, perhaps, two old friends smile, knowing they have not been forgotten.